I did do my meniscus, lateral meniscus in college, and 50% of it, so they had to sew it back on. I was out for 5 months. And when I came back from that, I had all those doubts. And then I played against Clint, my first game back.
This guy.
Dropped the bicycle
how many
kick
times
on
you
him?
gonna talk about this game? Every episode he brings it up.
Hey, I
He's
had to
wearing his
show him what's
Allen
up,
Iverson little headband. Something.
Yeah,
Hey, I only watched 7 episodes of this, and 6, I think you mentioned that.
yeah.
Violation. Oh, you thought I was done? Oh my God. No. Oh my God. Gotta face it, I'm the one. Oh my God. I want the check, want the check, want the check. Give me my respect, my respect, my respect. Medals on my neck, on my neck, on my neck. Tell them I'm the best, I'm the best, I'm the best. What they talking about?
Welcome everybody to another episode of Kickin It Season 2. We made it. It is good to be here. It's good to have you here with us as well. US Men's National Team great Hall of Famer, World Cup veteran Ramos. Thank you for dropping by.
Thank you for having me here. Yeah.
I said World Cup veteran, so 3 World Cups in the bag for you, 1990, 1994, 1998, and then still involved with the program beyond that. Is there like a best moment that the game has given you, kind of a standout moment for you?
Wow, to start with the best moment already. The best moment for me I'd have to say it'd have to be in the 1990 World Cup, playing in Rome against Italy. And not only because the magnitude of having to play the host country, one of the biggest nations in the world in soccer, at their home turf, but because of who we were. It was we were basically a bunch of kids who had been watching the guys on the other side on TV. And it seemed completely unreal. And I don't think anything else that happened in my career after, I don't think anything could match that.
What does that mean? Does that mean that the team didn't really feel like they belonged to some extent?
No, well, we didn't belong. But
okay.
I think we felt like we belonged a little bit more than we actually did. Because we were very far removed from like the football elite, let's say, in the world.
That must feel totally different for the Christian Pulisic generation.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big thing is players playing in Europe against the best leagues around the best players, and you know that gap is not as big. Because at that time, I mean, where were players playing professionally for the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, it was a little bit of everything. And I know you've had other guys here who told you a little bit about the stories, but I recall even, let's say 18 months leading into that World Cup, like John Harkes and I getting in a car here and driving over to Brooklyn Italians to make $400 a game to catch a game on a Sunday. I mean, that's who we were, You'd like, the national team was sometimes, and the other time you just had to go train on your own and try to stay fit and do what you can.
To build off of your question, it feels like you coached a lot of these current U.S. Men's National Team players throughout the youth process on the national team. Did you get a feeling then that they would be able to compete with the best in the world or play in the biggest leagues in the world back when they were under 17s, under 20s?
I did, because on the youth teams, you can get a pretty good gauge in terms of how competitive you are with the rest of the world. And I saw the change. So when I took over the under 20 national team, this is back in 2011, I had been Thomas Rongen's assistant for a little while. That's a little story we can get into if there's time. But when I took over, it was basically college players going to compete in the U20 qualifiers and then the World Cup. And then I saw the gradual change. So by 2013, we had about half college players and half players who were on real pro teams, not playing, but they were professional. So they trained every day, all year round. And that was a big, already by 2015, now we had a good team basically made up of mostly pros. And then my last cycle in 2019, it was fully professional. I actually left off the team guys like Aronson, that were guys. So you'd like the selections you had to make by the 4th cycle were already selections of, man, you're leaving off some guys who are already playing for the professional team. So I saw that change, and it could only end up being better at the senior level.
You talk about being in that position where you were coaching, the youth. What was it like for you being a youth player? Growing up in the States, you said you were born in Uruguay. You came over here when you were 11. What was that like through the youth system here, and how far it's come? But just kind of, what was that like for you?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll go back to what, the question Charlie asked, about seeing the competitiveness of our players compared to players from around the world. And I saw it firsthand. I thought that the talent we had on the youth national teams by 2016, 17 already was really as good as any country. I think it put us in a place at least at 19, 19 years old, because you got to remember, too, that at U20s, you don't get the best players when they're 19. You kind of get them like guys like Tyler Adams or Christian Pulisic or these kind of guys. You hope that you get the cycle before. So they're 2-3 years younger when you have them at the U20s. By the time you get them to the U20s, they're already not allowed to come. So you don't get those guys. But I think one of the things we did that was great is connect. I wanted our national teams to have a connection to our history. And so what I started to do with the players, when we go to qualifiers, so let's say an attacking player would have your name above his bed. A defensive player will have Marcelo Balboa's name above his bed. So
did that mean anything to them?
I think it did. I think it created a connection. Here's the thing, when you go to the youth national teams, and sometimes I used to bring players like my generation, the players don't know you. They don't really know who they are. They're young players, so
that's
they don't know you.
That's why I'm saying, yeah.
So they started to create that, we started to create that connection. So when they see somebody's name up on the wall, they'd be like, oh, they do the research, and then I'd ask them questions about them. So it created a good culture for our youth national teams. We had pretty much all our staffs were made up of guys who had been on the national teams before. And then on top of it, we connected them with pictures and everything else. In our meal rooms, there'll be pictures of these guys and Michael Bradley and all these other guys. So I think that was something that we created that made, I think, the players really love what they were doing.
What does that make you think in terms of, because there's always that question, right, of how long will it be till the U.S. has caught up with the rest of the world and is ready to win a World Cup? Does it happen by 2026 when they're playing on home soil? If you're seeing that at the U20 level, you think we're already there, we can win in a final of the U20 World Cup, does that mean you think that the US is already there, that they should be looking to get to a semi-final, to get to a final of the World Cup? Are they already there at that point?
And that's a great question, because and I get asked, not that I get asked that a lot, but I'd have to say that's a question that I really like answering, because I think it's not about technique. It's not about athletic ability. It's not about how fast or strong our guys are. I think it's a question of mentality. I think we're not hard enough to go for the wins. We've been, unfortunately for me, I have to say, unfortunately, we've been over the last 10, 12 years and sort of the culture of everyone gets a trophy culture. And that's a culture that the rest of the world doesn't really share with us.
Is that exclusive to soccer? Because when I think of the U.S. in sports, I think of winners. That's how I perceive the U.S. in sports. So do you think that's exclusive to soccer in this country, or you think it's all around? And
so I see it just like you. So when we created our style of play for the youth national teams, one of the things that we went back to is to say, okay, who are we as people in this country, right? So we took, okay, well, wait, we put a man on the moon, we win in the Olympics, we get all the gold medals of everything. So I saw that. And why is it that in soccer we just kind of get there and we fold? And partly more during our time, it was because we probably just weren't good enough. But I've seen in the last 10 years that we're good enough. So how do we get to compete and win the games? Sometimes you're just going to win games you're not supposed to win. And I think over the last few years, we've been doing that less and less.
You've been on some great teams. I think of the '94 team, how you obviously got elbowed by Leonardo and you were up a man.
Lost to Brazil 1-0.
1-0, that was tough. Our 2009 Confederations Cup team was just there to winning a major FIFA tournament. I go back to even 2010, 2014. There were just those moments where I felt like we're just a little piece away from making that run into a semifinal, to a final. So, to your point, I don't necessarily think it's the talent either, but it's got to be the coaching then, right? A big responsibility to getting, putting players in the right places to make sure that those decisions go the right way.
Is that what creates that mentality? Does that come from the coaches, or you think also that's the responsibility of the players to have
Well, no, it definitely comes from the coaches, but it doesn't necessarily come from one coach, that the coach that has you at the end. So now we can look, okay, you go to the national team and we see we don't have the mentality. But we could see it all along through the development academy when you go and watch games. And it's, you know, if you watch a development academy game 5 years ago, let's say, and I'm sure you guys have seen them, right? And you go to a field and the game ends and you watch the players walk off the field, you can't tell who won and who lost the game. And that to me was always puzzling. I'm like, well, wait a minute, does it even matter? Does it matter that no one slide tackles anywhere to win a ball, that they try to win that 20-80 ball that you're not supposed to go after? Like, we don't have that. So to answer your question, I think it is coaching, but I think it's the coaching not at the end, but already at the start that I think needs to be a little bit more demanding.
I agree with that, because even at the club level, you see it a lot of times. It's coaches can hide behind, oh, we're developing, and it's the mix of having, like you said, a winning mentality, being more cutthroat. Like, go about it in the right way and fight for what you want to get. To what you're saying, I feel like I see that.
Can you coach mindset is kind of given, right? Can you coach that, do you think?
Yeah, of course you can coach that, because players want to play. So you have the ultimate weapon.
Oh, okay.
If players don't want to do what you are asking them to do, they don't play. And so that's your ultimate weapon. And if winning is important to you, you have to make it a point to the players that that's important. Like, so I can tell you, so I'm born in Uruguay, grew up in Uruguay, started playing youth at 6 years old. And in Uruguay, when you start at 6 years old, it's called baby football.
Yeah.
You start baby football. But baby football is not a joke, by the way, at 6 years old. By 8 years old, you're playing games that, like, you're supposed to win. Like, you're playing, like, your club, you go into, and you guys can, since you've played overseas, you know what it's like to go into your club. You go into your club, and then you're playing the team that's, like, literally 2 blocks away, and you're sharing the same field. The day of the derby, like, you're supposed to win that game. It doesn't matter that you're 8 years old. The parents are right. And I'm not saying that's the answer to it, but I'm saying that has something to do with the mentality of having to go to the game, and it's not just, it's about winning.
You think soccer in this country is too nice?
I think it's too nice. There's no question it's too nice.
Yeah.
And
there's no
I
doubt
coach
about
at the
it.
U9 level now. I've been coaching U7, U8, now U9. So I've seen kind of the environment. And there's a lot of, we're not trying to play to win. We don't want the parents to be so involved. Everyone wins in a lot of ways. But in building off of that,
you freaking hate that, don't you?
Yeah, I hate that.
Where do you think the disconnect is? Because
I never wanted to be a coach. I'll be honest. Never wanted to be a coach. When I was a player, I have no idea what the coaches told me. I never really listened to the coach. I was kind of like, who do I have to get when they attack? Is that my guy? I'll get my guy. But then I was waiting I wanted to do enough defending so that I could get away with being on the field.
Right.
And then if I'm on the field, then the rest is, you know, and I know you were a lot like that too. Like, you don't know what you're doing next. No one can tell you. Like, there's not a coach that can tell you. So I think what's important is to give, you know, to sort of give, to give that freedom. But at the same time, when I started to coach, since I didn't know that that's what I wanted to do, I took a couple courses. So going back to your question, so I started coaching like U8s, U9s. I did U9s for a year, I did U10s for a year, I did U11 for a year, U12 for a year, U13, U14, U16, U18. So I put the time into the different age groups. And when I started with the U8s and U9s, I wouldn't allow them to kick the ball out of bounds, for example. I wanted them to get out of trouble. Even if it was within our box, I'd want them to get out of trouble, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that you don't want to win the game.
Yeah.
And to answer the other part of your question, the other coach is going to put their big guy up front who's fast. Well, we have to solve that problem. Now you've got to defend better. Now, how do we help? How do we bring somebody over when the ball goes over the top? How does the keeper play out of the box so that he can help you in the long ball? So there are always teaching moments, and I think you should never not think about winning.
Do you now think that, do you agree with that with hindsight? You can't teach the game unless you've taught it at that level?
I think everyone's different. So maybe there are players that are a little bit more studious of the game. I was really fortunate, actually. I had amazing coaches. So in Spain, I had Jorge D'Alessandro, who went on to coach Atletico Madrid, who I still hear his voice when I coach. Lorenzo Serra Ferrer. I had Carlos Queiroz. I had Carlos Alberto Pereira, who won the World Cup. So I've had great coaches to learn from, and I felt like, man, I I didn't take all that in. But there are players who do. So like, you know, if I take, you know, to take someone more current who would know, like you take a player like Michael Bradley, for example, and you know that at some point he's going to be a coach because he's constantly like, Coach, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? Why don't we do this? Why don't we, you know? And there are players like that that you can see, I'm sure that you've had on your teams where you can tell they're going to be coaches. I wasn't one of those, but.
What I think is cool about coaching at the youth level aspect is being able to like see people that are going to trust you, believe in you, and you can actually see the work and how much you improve. Because the older that players are, it has to be more difficult for them to listen and get them to buy in, right? But at the younger age, it seems like what's be a good aspect of the coaching is you can actually see they're believing in you, they're trying to get better, and you can see that improvement, and they buy in quicker, right?
Yeah, there's no doubt. And then I think the one thing that you learn as you're going through the process is that at the end of the day, no matter what, you know, when you're young, you have the parents on the outside and you have your coaches, and then as you get older, the parents aren't there anymore, but the coaches are there. But the bottom line is that the team always knows where you stand. And I think that was my education through soccer, is knowing that, you know, at the end of the day, no matter what the press says, no matter what the coaches say, no matter what people outside of our circle say, we know who's who here, right? And so I thought, okay, how do I get the youth national team players to understand that part of it, because they haven't lived it yet. They haven't lived what it's like to be on a competitive team like that. And I used to do a circle after all our games, you know, the next day, and sometimes the night of the game. And I used to ask the players one by one, they'd have to be in the circle and they'd have to say, okay, tell me how you played, whether you can do better, or whether you played as well as you can play, and also tell me one or two guys on the team who you think did well. And that was in front of us, so it was just the coaches and the players. And we did that with the youth national teams, and I found that that was a very good exercise for us, because you put yourself out there. So if I'm asking you, Clint, how did you do today? And you go, I think I did great. And so here's the problem. You telling me you did great. The problem is, if I don't think you did great and you think you did great,
and nobody else.
Now I'm thinking, that's your limit? That's what you're shooting for? That's not good enough for me, right? But if you say, hey, you know what? I made a couple good plays, but I can do better. I have to do this better. I have to run back better. Now, first of all, I'm seeing your honesty. I'm seeing, man, this guy's bought in, but everybody else is hearing it. Everybody's going, oh, yeah, Clint, although he's our best guy, but he's realizing. And so those are the little things that I think as a player, those are not in the coaching schools.
But also it's a reality check from the other kids that they don't say that you do well. And you're like, you know what? I want to do well enough that they say my name in the huddle next time. You know what I mean? So it's a motivating factor to have something like that.
Yeah, I mean, think about how special it is. You can play a game, and both of you guys have played a million games in which you were great, and everybody can say they're great. But if your teammates think you're great, there's nothing like that.
Yeah.
Right? That's the best. I think that's the ultimate.
You know, you talked about what coming up in Uruguay was like and the development at that young age there. You're considered one of the most talented and skilled attacking players that the US men's national team ever had, right? But imagine you had stayed in Uruguay. Do you think would you have hit a different level just because of being there and training there? Or do you think you got everything out of your career that you could?
I mean, it's tough to play the hypothetical game, but I can tell you this. When we moved to this country, I remember telling my father, out of all the countries in the world that we're going to, why do we have to go to the one that doesn't play football? So it was rough for me. Like the first 6 months in this country were really difficult because I kind of had to find my way, and who felt about the game the way I did. You know, like I was the kid that was at home. I was like doing the fake microphone, you know, doing Nacional against Peñarol. That's the derby, you know, like that was me every day. I knew every player. I can name you the starting lineup of Nacional in 1976, like right now. River Plate, like that was my other team, and that, you know, because Uruguay and Argentina are so close, so we kind of like grow up together. So, and then to come here and you're like, whoa, you know, it's a big country and people aren't into it. The Cosmos is here, but Cosmos is kind of like it's a great team, but it's a little bit of a circus, you know. It wasn't really, And so that was really difficult. So where would I have ended up? I don't know. I was 11 when I left. Uruguay is very rough when it comes to football. So you play baby football from 6 to 12. And at 12 years old, you either pretty much go pro or you like go sell hot dogs or something. Like you finish at that point pretty much at 12. So it's very, and then in this country, it's kind of like, you know, you're 14, 15, you kind of, I found like people were still kind of learning how to play at that time. And it was a big, big change for me.
Where do you rate the coaches in this country? Because I feel like that's something we lack on, because pay to play is often talked about, but we still have top players in this country, youth players. So I don't necessarily think that pay to play is the sole issue. I think a bigger issue is the quality of coaching for younger players. Yeah.
So first, to get it out of the way, pay to play can't ever go away. Coaches have to get paid. Somebody has to pay them, right? So that won't go away. Now, let's be honest. Everybody wants to have the best player on their team, and that player is not paying, right? I mean, that's how I used to come home and tell my dad, Dad, I made the regional team. You know, my dad would be like, great. Doesn't really know what that is. But he'd be like, okay, that's great. That's great that you made the regional team. And I'd be like, oh, it's $250. He goes, well, you're not going. You know, like it was as simple as that. Like, it's over. You know, if you have to pay $1, you're not playing soccer.
But what I will say, I mean, there's probably on each club team, how many people though could a team pay for that kid? Maybe 2 players. You know what I mean?
Right.
Kind of, you're limited to how many people that wouldn't have to pay. You know,
Right.
and it's getting more expensive. But I see what you're saying. You got to be able to pay the coaches or figure out ways, whether transfer fees when these kids go pro, which some of the academies are doing, to be able to offset that cost.
And here's to answer Charlie's question. So the coaching has to be better, but you have to remember, coaches in this country, I think, are as educated as anywhere in the world. Like, people go out of their way to take their courses, you know, to take the D, the C course, the B, the A. Like, they invest into it. And so at some point, then you got to get paid. Like, that's your profession. Right, so you need that. And now, does the coaching have to get better? Yeah, it has to get better. But when your general direction is, okay, we have to play out of the back no matter what. We have to play 4-3-3 no matter what. We have to. So you're very limited to. That's why I always wanted on the youth national teams. I wanted former players, because I wanted former players to just have a structure to love because I know they love the game. I wanted to make sure that they love teaching the game, but then I didn't want to tell them what to do. I wanted their experiences to help them teach the kids, because just like I used to put the names on the wall, or I used to do the little circle, you know, come up with whatever you feel helped you to teach the kids. So at the youth national teams, we used to have a style of play, and it was in general 4-3-3, high press, because high press, I felt like it fits the kind of people that we are. I continue to feel that, by the way. You know, if it were me, I'd high press the whole game all the time. And yes, sometimes you're gonna lose 5-0. Yeah, you're gonna lose. But most of the time, your players are gonna be happy because the American player is willing to work and willing to go after teams. And in particular, the American player loves to be the underdog. And so I think that really fit our personality, you know?
So your response to Charlie is that coaching in the US is at the level that it needs to be? Because I don't think that's the common perception or the widest perception. To ask a blunt question, do you feel like coaching was an issue this summer for the US men's national team?
Okay, I mean, yeah, look, I've been saying this is a longer answer, because, you know, the national team is different, you know. So the national team is not but this is my opinion, it's not a project. The national team is go and pick the best players today that we have and go win this game. I feel like it's more that than it's, okay, let me just pick a bunch of guys who are coming along and let's do, in 6 years, we're gonna be good. I mean, if somebody tells me...
It's not like club ball where day in and day out, right, you get to work on something.
But somebody tells me 6 years and I'm a fan, I'm gonna go, okay, well, I'll come to the games in 6 years. Right. Why am I coming all this time to see the, you know, for the end of it? So I do think that, you know, the team lost sharpness. I do think that the team didn't come along. I think the 2022 World Cup was sort of the point where we should have said, we need to take it to the next level now, because I think we're getting stale. We could see it coming. We saw it coming before that World Cup with the game against Japan and the game against Saudi Arabia. We saw it in qualifying, although in qualifying we could say at the time, well, it's a young team. Okay, so here's where I go with that. So it's a young team. We qualify on goal differential. We're in third place, let's not forget, right, to the 22. So we say, okay, it's a young team. But if I'm a fan, I don't care that it's a young team.
Yeah.
I want to win games.
Yeah.
Like, don't give me the excuse that we're not good enough because we're young.
No matter what the age.
That's not good enough. Yeah, okay, bring a couple of young guys so they get the experience. But
that was
let's
almost
take
like
our best guys.
That was almost like a built-in excuse if it didn't go well.
Right. We're not going to be great. Okay, guys, you ready for that? Because we're young. We're not going to be great, so we're just going to get by. Just be ready for that.
One of the better players of that tournament ended up being the older player, Tim Ream.
Right. Right, so there you go. So I think at the end of the day, you got to pick the best guys.
Is that you saying in the kindest possible way, Greg shouldn't have been brought back for that second stint? Because you're saying we could see it at 2022 in Qatar, what was happening, it was getting stale. Does that therefore mean we should have made a change at that point?
No, I think it's no secret. I think a lot of us said that, and I said it at the time, too, that it was time for a change. Now, after they decide they go into this search for 6 months, and they find Greg again. Now at that point we support him. So I'm working on the networks, and I'm like, okay, well, this is our coach now. So now we got to be behind. We got to support, and hopefully we start taking steps. Let's forget about the coach. Can the team get better? But then we could see that it wasn't happening.
Moment, though, from U.S. soccer. The fact that, like you say, basically it boils down to 6 months they search and they come back to what they already had. Did you feel like that was an underwhelming moment from U.S. soccer?
Definitely time wasted.
It was certainly
too much time wasted.
At the very least, it was wasted time, and I think it was a disappointment to most people because I thought that was the time. With 26 coming, I thought it was the time to just go spend money and hire the best coach you can hire.
You want World Cup experience.
I felt like we needed somebody that when he walks in the room now, like, players are going to be like, oh, okay, this is the real deal.
Is there an American name that should be in the mix?
At the moment, we need somebody from outside who's not committed to any of the politics or any of the people around who are going to come in and go, oh, you don't play? You're not coming in. You're playing, you're coming in. I don't care if you play in China, you're coming in because I think you can do the job, you do the job. But if you're sitting on the bench somewhere and I don't feel like you should play, I'm not committed to anyone.
Right.
And I think we likely only can get that with a foreign coach.
You think connections play too big of a role within U.S. soccer?
On such a short period of time, it could be detrimental, yeah.
Was that how Jürgen was? Is that, in your mind, how you see Jürgen Klinsmann? Because you coached under him, right?
Yeah.
Did you see him as that kind of the outsider who was able to cut through in that same kind of way?
He struggled with that. I mean, Jürgen had a tough time because everything was an obstacle. Everything was an obstacle, and I'm sure if you interview him, he's not going to say that because he's too nice. So he'll never. But he had a lot of good ideas. Whether it was the traveling gym that we barely used, whether it was like he had a lot of good ideas to make our national team better. It was the first time we actually had real meetings where we dissected what the full national team was about, from like the PR department to the medical department, like all sitting together. It was the first time he did all of those things for the first time. And every time it was an obstacle. And I think we got to a point where like they said, well, you're spending too much money. And Jürgen's like, okay, well, let's just do a friendly against Mexico in like March or something, off FIFA days, just to make some money so that we could do all the things that I want to do with the players. But Jürgen was all about stretching the program, making it better, taking no prisoners, not being committed to anyone, just doing what he thought was right to make the team better. And then it became difficult. And I think he lasted a good 5 or 6 years. But I think he had a lot of obstacles that we discussed, a lot private and a lot that were out in the open.
I mean, to his point, he did a good job. He got to a semifinal of major tournament, Copa America. We got beat by Argentina. We got out of the group of death in Brazil and, went up against a Belgian side that we got beat in overtime against. So there was definitely some good times and a good style of play that we played under him as a manager.
Where did he fail in your mind?
Well, I think sometimes it goes the same message goes on for too long. But you know, to go back to that team that you're talking about, Clint. So I think that 2014 team for me was the best team we've had. And I know I can go back to 94, and I think 94 was a very good team that we had too. And I know that people will say, well, 2002 made it to the quarterfinals. The 2002 team was very good, but they were losing 3-0 to Poland until South Korea scored against Portugal. Like, they were out, right? So then they played Mexico in the next round. Okay, so give credit for that. But the 2014 team, I mean, okay, so they beat Ghana the first game, which you're supposed to win.
And Josie got hurt.
Josie got hurt.
He was our target striker. Then I had to play target, which was not my best position. I'm more of a withdrawn type forward.
We became a one-forward team with like 5 across the middle. Before we were a 4-4-2. Yeah. So it changed everything within. He got hurt in 10 minutes, right?
Exactly.
I mean, but that was like such a strong roster. You go player by player. I like to compare teams position by position to say, okay, who's better, right? And I think it's tough to beat that 2014 team. I mean, when you put, you know, Jermaine Jones and Michael Bradley in the center of the field, I mean, can we say that is McKinney already better than Jermaine Jones? Is Tyler Adams already better than Michael Bradley? Is, you know, like, and you go one by one, and you're like, wow, you know, that team, and so that team is hard to match up with. And then you played Germany, right? Germany ended up beating Brazil 7-1 that World Cup. And player by player, we likely didn't have many who could go into that Germany team, right? Same would have been for that Portugal team. That was Ronaldo's prime, and we should have won that game. And then Belgium was their golden generation, but that was a great team.
Wando scores.
We had that set piece, yeah.
How much of you rating the 2014 team above the current generation is to do with mentality? Because obviously that's a big thing that you look at too.
I mean, it's some of it, but I think that 2014 was incredibly talented. I mean, I think sometimes people don't give Jermaine Jones the credit he deserves. Jermaine Jones was, he was a warrior, but he was a good soccer player. Like, he could put a ball on a dime from 50 yards away with the right foot or left foot. I don't know that we've ever had anyone in this country who could do that. Jermaine Jones was that guy, and I think we were very lucky to have him on the team. And you look at other guys, you look at Clint, you look at Michael in the center of the field, even Cameron in the back at the time, he was in good form. I mean, you had, Yedlin on one side, Fabian Johnson on the other side, who, like, big teams on it. I mean, that team was the real deal. I really enjoyed being around those guys because I thought it was a great team.
What would be the advice that you would give to the current team now after going through the build-up to '94 and then, how you were able to deal with that pressure and expectations of what was put on your shoulders? Like, what would be some advice that you would give to the current players and just how important it is and things that you wish someone maybe would have told you?
Yeah, I mean, I would, it was difficult for us because we didn't have anyone before us, really. I mean, the before was, it was Harry Keogh and Walter Barr, and those guys played in the 50s, and sometimes they'd come around, and that meant a lot to us. But for these guys, I would say, you take advantage of the moment and take the responsibility. Use the responsibility as a force, rather than just say, hey, you know what? I'm just going to go to the 26 World Cup and just play the game. No, take all the responsibility of moving this game in the right direction and use that as the force. Use that, the power to not let somebody beat you. I think I would say something like that because it's a really big moment, and I don't think that we'll have another one. And this moment really has to stick.
Should that really be their responsibility?
Yes.
Why?
For me, yes. Because that's part of who we are as a nation. We're a new soccer nation, only of a few decades. And I think, unfortunately, we're at that point where we need the players to be more than just players. And that's part of being a national team player, and that's okay. I don't think that's too much to ask.
If someone had said that to you, how would you have felt about that?
Well, I mean, the most important thing is to walk the walk, but, you got to be able to do both, talk the talk and walk the walk. So with responsibility, I was never really someone who talked that much to the media, but Jürgen made me captain, and you accept that responsibility, that's the position that you were in now to do more, speaking that what you normally would do, because I was more of someone who kind of stayed to myself and just kind of focused on what I needed to do to make sure that I could do the best that I could for the team, So that was kind of like my mentality, but it did make me a better player by having that responsibility and stepping out of my comfort zone. I felt like when I was captain under Jürgen, I mean, that was some of the best games that I played for my country.
And by the way, I didn't like doing it. So it wasn't like I welcomed it when I played. I didn't like doing interviews. I didn't like doing anything that was outside. The only thing I liked was to play.
And
that was the only thing that was important to me. Huh?
You like commercials.
When you get paid, it's funny the things you do when you get paid, right? You try to, but no,
you preach to the choir. This guy do anything, huh?
No, but yeah, I didn't enjoy it, but I knew it was part of my responsibility, so I did everything I had to do.
Which of the guys, like the current generation that you have been around, because you've been around a Pulisic or an Adams or those guys, did you have them come through? Yeah. Who stood out to you and why? Like, who kind of really struck you as special? Okay, so it's an easy answer, but I'm going to make it a little longer just because I talk a lot. And I don't know if you guys run out of tape, if tape exists anymore. No, it's not a thing.
There's no tape. Okay. So, out of the 2022 World Cup, I had 14 players that I coached myself out of the 26, and 8 others that I didn't really coach, but I was like assistant, when I was with Clint, so like with Christian, for example, we brought Christian up. I think Argentina game was his first game when we brought him up, and he was like 16 or whatever. Oh. So I didn't really coach him. I was part of the staff when he came up. But in total, it was 22 guys. But I have to say, of all the guys, the one that in 10 minutes made me look twice and go, what is going on over there, was Tyler Adams. Tyler Adams ate up the field from the moment he stepped onto the youth national teams. I couldn't believe it. Actually, I brought him in. He was 3 years younger than everybody else. I brought him to the under-20s, and at halftime of the game, I made him captain of the team. I was like, here, everybody needs to be like you. He was by far the one that was easiest to notice that he had potential to be next level. Unfortunately now he's had a lot of injuries and things like that, but he was easily the one.
How did you feel like injury affected your career?
Yeah, it was terrible. I think my last 7 or 8 years, I was injured literally every couple months.
Well, what about obviously one of the famous injuries that you took is the elbow to the head. Which World Cup was that again? Remind me. 94. The Brazilian player was?
Leonardo.
Okay. Just kind of recount that for me. What do you remember about that?
I mean, I remember what I've seen on the image, but I know it was about, 35, 40 minutes into the game. I remember that I was protecting the ball, and I tried to meg him with a back heel to get up the line. And when I went for the meg, he closed his legs like this, so the ball kind of got stuck a little bit between his legs. And so I flipped around to try to grab him, and I went to grab him, he went like that. And since I'm shorter than just about all the players, it got me right there, right on the side of the head. So it cracked my skull, and then that was the end of that. Then I went to the hospital. I was out for about 5, 6 months.
Do you have any brain bleeding from the elbow?
I did, yeah, I did. So I saw here in New York, I saw the doctor for the U.S. boxing Olympic team, and he told me if you were a boxer, I would never let you box again, because if you get hit in the head again,
damn.
I mean, you could not talk or not walk, or he goes, I don't know what could happen. And at the time, I thought, and my family did too. My family thought, well, I mean, you got to stop playing.
Yeah, because I mean, a head is the same thing as...
Or being in a wall.
Yeah.
I mean, I normally would duck in the wall anyway, but...
Nowadays, they have you lay on the ground. Nowadays, he'd be the guy on the ground.
And I'd be like this. But,
so did you consider it? Did you consider giving up the game?
I did a little bit, but I mean, it would have been too devastating for me. I don't think I could have lived my life, Knowing how I grew up, I could have never quit the game. Like, I wanted to, if I would have died on the field, I think everybody would have known that I died doing what I wanted, what I loved doing.
How discouraging mentally to deal with that time?
It's terrible. I think for anybody who's been injured, you guys have been injured, it's the worst, because you see the team go out on the field and you know, you're working so hard to get back,
Dude,
and it's
I
a
hated
nightmare.
riding on that bike,
It's a nightmare.
stationary bike,
All
trying
the
to
work,
get back.
all the work you got to do to just to get back on the field.
Does it feel lonely?
Yeah.
Yes, no doubt. It's terrible.
Does doubt begin to creep in too? Of like, am I going to get back to who I was? Am I going to get back to where I once was?
Yeah, that's always it. You know, with anything that you have, like, are you going to be the same coming back? Especially if you have to have surgery, because once you have surgery, you're never really the same. It's going to be slightly different feel, and you just manage and, like you said, just work hard and need a little bit of luck too.
I was completely a different person. I was put together again. But I did do my meniscus, lateral meniscus in college, and 50% of it, so they had to sew it back on. I was out for 5 months. And when I came back from that, I had all those doubts. And then I played against Clint, my first game back.
This guy.
Dropped the bicycle
how many
kick on
times
him.
you gonna talk about this game? Every episode he brings it up.
Hey, I
He's
had to
wearing his
show him what's up,
Allen
you know?
Iverson little headband. Dude, something.
Yeah,
Hey, I only watched 7 episodes of this, and 6, I think you mentioned that.
yeah.
You know what I thought was the coolest thing as a kid is seeing you in that commercial where you're doing that move. Was it a Snickers commercial? Which commercial
That
was
was
it?
Snickers, yeah.
And I was like,
Wait, what happened? I'm not seeing the commercial.
well, I just remember being a kid seeing one of our national team players like have skill, like do moves, and it was like in this commercial, and I was just like, I just thought that was the coolest thing because I'd never seen an American soccer player in a commercial before, so I was just like, every time I see you, that's what I think about.
But what do you remember about the commercial?
I remember the move. You did like a Maradona, like you stepped on the ball, rolled it.
Right. But what did you notice? At the end of the move, I lose the ball. So the ball, like I lose control of the ball. So I do like a spin, and the ball gets away. But they put that on the actual commercial because no one knew anything about soccer.
I didn't notice that.
Yeah, see that? I actually was not good, and they put it in there anyway.
I saw that move. I was like, whoa. I was in Nacogdoches. I was like, wow.
Did you have,
The cool
true
commercial was the one with Scottie Pippen, the McDonald's one. You saw that one?
No.
So I did a commercial for McDonald's in which Scottie Pippen and I had to teach Scottie how to kick a ball. So Scottie Pippen and I are at where the posters of this kid's wall. So the kid goes to McDonald's, comes back, and he puts his fries down in his room, and then his mom calls him, so he leaves the room. And when he leaves the room, Scottie and I jump out of the poster, and we start eating the fries. And then all of a sudden, we hear he's coming back, so we jump back on the poster. And when I jump on the poster, I jump into the basketball one, so I'm doing a layup, and he jumps into the soccer one, so he's like,
that's cool.
That was pretty cool, yeah. So I had to
dope.
teach Scottie how to kick the ball.
They don't make commercials like that anymore. That's
It was
dope.
a pretty cool commercial, actually. It was pretty good.
What is your hope in terms of where 2026 can take the game in this country then? What do you hope is the impact?
My hope is that we can walk into a bar in some random place in the U.S. and that somebody's talking about soccer, about U.S. soccer, because I think this is where we've lacked for the last 30 years. So we started, the game didn't exist before '94 practically. Let's just say that was the rebirth of the game. That becomes now a league. Now that league is amazing, right? Every team has their own stadium. They have full youth development. We have all of that. Each team has their fan base that goes to the game and that cheers at the game. But it still has not become a game of this country. It's still not a game that people talk about. So if I went to Seattle, and Seattle has one of the best fan bases in the country, and I asked them who's the number 10 for Nashville, they're likely not going to know that Mukhtar's the number 10. If I asked the Red Bulls here, you know, if I asked any fan who the starting team is, they don't know. It's likely that more people still in New Jersey may know myself and Tony Meola than they would know the current Red Bull players. And I'm not saying that necessarily like as a bad thing. I'm saying it as I want us to get closer to soccer being the real thing in this country, to being a game that people care about. And I think we have a lot of work to do. And I think this 2026 is a really, really important moment to close that gap with the other sports.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Not wait for every World Cup for it to be more mainstream. Like, it should be more mainstream even in the years that are not a World Cup year. And especially, like you said, having that opportunity at home in 2026 to do something great. I mean, the women's team has been able to do it, and they win Olympics and win World Cups. But the men's team, I mean, you look at the last Copa America, it's like it was on home soil. What a big opportunity to try to build, and, you know, we dropped the ball. So hopefully we get it right.
We had Thomas Rongen as a guest on this show, who, by the way, I had never met him before. He's a character.
He is a character.
He's an interesting guy.
Nature of the
Didn't
beast,
you have
brother.
a story? You said you had a Thomas Rongen story, and you haven't mentioned it yet.
Well, my story with Thomas Rongen is I was his assistant coach, so he opened the door to me in the U20. So I used to help him. This is back in the Breck Shea generation of U20, right before I came on, and so I went with that team. Then he brought me in with the next team a little bit. And then he didn't qualify to the World Cup, and he got fired. So my story about Thomas Rongen is the good heart and the good person that he is. Because after all, I'm sure when he was sitting here, he was like all over the place.
Yeah.
Right? He's always, so that's Thomas. That's Thomas. But so because I was his assistant, so Thomas gets fired in 2011. And I was one of his assistants. I was like third assistant or second assistant or something. I was somewhere in there. And they call me. U.S. Soccer calls me, and they're like, well, we have a trip to France. We'd like for you to take the team to France because, you know, Thomas was just fired. And so I go to U.S. Soccer, I go, well, I can't take the team. I've seen this in football my whole life, where, like, your assistant coach is hoping that you leave, so, you know, you take the job. So I go, I'm sorry, I would love to do that. That's what I'm working for, but I can't take the team. I can't do it. And they said to me, they go, no, Thomas Rongen said that we should make you do it. He got fired, and so Thomas, I owe him everything, because really he's the one that not only gave me an opportunity to come on board on his staff, but he's the one that said, no, even if you feel you're not ready, you're taking the under-20s. Like, that's your job. I think you're ready. You got to go do it. And so I said to U.S. Soccer, I was like, really? He said that? And they go, yeah, he said that. I was like, well, I'm going to call him to make sure. So I said, I'll call you back. So I called Thomas, and Thomas goes, man, go for it. You're ready to go. Don't worry about it. Yeah, everything will be great. Take the job. Take the job. And I called U.S. Soccer back, and I said, I'll take the team.
I have so much respect. So much respect for Thomas.
Yep.
Because Bob Jenkins, who was at UVA, you know, he brought me on the U18 national team with Alfonso Mondello, and then Thomas Rongen called me up, and that's where I got to build that connection with Thomas, and just a special guy.
Yeah. I mean, you have to hear the same stories all the time, by the way. The one about Cruyff, and the one that he wakes up in somebody's pool or something. He's like, what am I doing? You know, like, you always hear. The
Prince jacket. You know,
yeah. Him hanging out with the Beatles at Studio 54 or whatever, you know. I mean, he's, you know.
You getting selected for the national team, for your father, was that like the culmination of, like, the immigrant story? You know what I mean? Like, we've come to this country, now my son plays for the national team. Like, we've made it.
Yeah, I mean, my parents couldn't believe it. And I would say, in particular, my mom, my dad was very much an old type personality, you know? So it was like, oh, okay, you know, it's good. Yeah, you made the team, you know, it's great. You know, he's always great. But he wasn't like the positive guy ever. Like, I never played a good game. Like, my dad was always like, oh, you got to do this and you got to do that, you know, always. But my mom was a real soccer fan. My mom was like, if I had to put a picture of my mom, it would be her doing something in the kitchen with a soccer game on the TV in the background. She knew everything about soccer. She knew about transfers. She knew who got sold where. And my mom really loved it. She was really, she really took it, like, she couldn't believe it that I was a national team player. She loved it so much. Yeah, so I would say, obviously, my whole family. My grandmother, at the same time, it just so happened we went to to qualify in Guatemala. We qualified to the World Cup, and we do the World Cup draw, and who do we get in our group? We get Uruguay, right? And who do we play the first game? Uruguay. So my grandmother calls me from Uruguay, and she called me Tabby. She goes, Tabby. She goes, I want you to be the best player that day, but Uruguay has to win. Just like that. So that's kind of where things are.
Tab, U.S. men's national team legend. We appreciate you coming through. It was good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Very good to hear all your stories. Can I give you a hug? Thank you for coming in.
Thank you so much.
Good to see you.
All right.
It wasn't too painful, was it?
Thank you, buddy.
It wasn't too
painful,
painful.
was it? Loved it. You're awesome, buddy. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for watching. If you liked this episode of Kickin' It, then don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to enjoy more raw and unfiltered content from me and the boys.